there is a word almost everyone uses and almost nobody has looked up: Antichrist. It appears 5 times in the entire Bible, and all 5 of them are in 2 short letters written by John. It is not in the book of Revelation. Daniel never uses it. Paul never wrote it down a single time. And when John finally does define the word, he does not describe a politician, a king, or a man at all. He writes that it is a spirit, that it is already in the world, and that it operates by entering. That is a very different claim from the one most people have been handed. And there is one ancient book that explains exactly how a spirit like that functions, what it needs from a body, and what happens when it is finally handed a throne. That book was quoted directly inside the New Testament. Then it was removed. And before we go further, I need to pause for a second, because what I'm about to tell you gets significantly darker. And I realized a while ago that some of this cannot be fully explained in a video format. The complete reconstruction of the Book of Enoch's account of what takes the throne, the full chapter 15 passage describing what the Nephilim became after their bodies died, the chapter 69 record of the hidden name that holds creation together, the council rulings, and the names of the men who wrote Enoch out of the canon, I put it all into a written document. It's linked below, and the QR code is on your screen. Now let's continue. Start with what John actually wrote, because this is the only place in Scripture where the word is defined rather than assumed. In his first letter, chapter 4, verse 3, he tells his readers how to test what they are dealing with. Every spirit that does not confess Jesus is not from God. And this, he says, is the spirit of Antichrist, which you have heard is coming and is now already in the world. Read that slowly. Already in the world. Written somewhere around the end of the 1st century. Not a warning about a man who would be born in some distant future, but a statement about something present at the time of writing. 2 verses earlier, he opens with an instruction that most readers skip past. Do not believe every spirit, but test the spirits, to see whether they are from God. He is not telling a congregation how to identify a bad emperor. He is telling them how to identify what is speaking through a person standing in front of them. In his 2nd chapter, he goes further and says that many antichrists have already come, plural, and in his 2nd letter he defines the term one more time, describing it as anyone who does not acknowledge Jesus coming in the flesh. Coming in the flesh. That phrase is doing far more work than it appears to. The entire test is about embodiment. Who is in the body, and where did they come from? Now hold that against what Paul writes to the church at Thessalonica. In his 2nd letter, chapter 2, he describes a figure most people call the man of lawlessness. But look at how he describes the timing. The mystery of lawlessness, he says, is already at work. Already. Same tense as John. Then he adds something stranger. Something is currently holding it back, and it will keep holding it back until it is taken out of the way, and only then will the lawless one be revealed. Revealed is not the same as born. You reveal something that already exists and is currently hidden. Paul is not describing a birth announcement. He is describing a restraint being lifted off something that has been waiting. And then there is Revelation, the book that everyone quotes on this subject and almost nobody reads carefully on this specific point. Chapter 13. The beast rises out of the sea, and John records what happens next in a single sentence that changes the whole shape of the question. The dragon gave him his power, and his seat, and great authority. Gave. The beast does not seize the throne. The beast does not conquer its way to the throne. The throne is handed over, which means the being on that throne is not the origin of the power sitting in it. It is the recipient. There is something behind it doing the giving. 9 verses later, John describes the 2nd beast performing an act that most people read as theatrical and is actually the most precise sentence in the chapter. It is given power to give breath to the image of the beast, so that the image could speak. An image. A constructed thing, not a born thing. And what it receives is breath, which in the Hebrew and Greek of Scripture is the same word used for spirit. Something inanimate is given a spirit, and then it speaks. So, across 3 separate New Testament writers, you get the same architecture. A spirit that is already present, a thing that is revealed rather than born, a throne that is handed over rather than taken, and a body, or an image, that receives breath from somewhere else. None of these writers stop to explain the mechanics of any of that. They write as though their readers already understand it. And that is the part worth sitting with, because it means there was a shared framework in 1st century Judea that explained where these disembodied spirits came from and what they wanted. That framework is not lost. It survives in a single book, and one of the men who wrote the New Testament quotes it by name. The Book of Enoch is not a medieval invention or a modern forgery. Fragments of it, in the original Aramaic, were pulled out of Cave 4 at Qumran alongside the Dead Sea Scrolls, and they date to roughly 2 centuries before Christ. It was circulating, widely, in the exact time and place where the New Testament was written. And its central subject is not the flood, or angels in general, or heaven. Its central subject is the origin of unclean spirits. The story opens in chapter 6. 200 beings, the text calls watchers, descend onto the summit of Mount Hermon in the far north of ancient Israel. Their leader is named Semjaza. Before they descend, they bind themselves together with an oath, because they know what they are about to do carries a penalty, and they want to make sure no one can back out and inform on the rest. What they do is take human wives. And chapter 7 records the result. The women bore great giants, and the giants consumed the acquisitions of men. And when men could no longer sustain them, the giants turned against them and devoured mankind. There is a detail in chapter 6 that is easy to read past. The text names the place, Mount Hermon, and it explains that the mountain was given that name because of the oath sworn on it. Hermon carries the sense of a curse or a binding. The descent has a location you can drive to on the modern border between Lebanon and Syria, and the text treats it as a real coordinate rather than a symbol. Most people know this part. The Nephilim, the giants, the hybrid offspring. It appears in Genesis chapter 6 in 3 compressed verses that explain nothing. Enoch gives it 40 chapters. But the part that matters for this question is not what the giants did while they were alive. It is what happened to them after they died. Because the flood killed the bodies, it did not touch what was inside them. Chapter 15 is the hinge of the entire book, and it is the passage that almost nobody quotes. The setup is this. The imprisoned watchers ask Enoch to carry a petition on their behalf, pleading for mercy. Enoch delivers it. The answer comes back, and it is not addressed to Enoch. It is addressed to them, and it is brutal. The text says they were spirits, living forever, and they had no need of wives, because their dwelling place was heaven. They did not require bodies. They had one already, of a kind that does not decay. And by taking flesh and producing children through it, they created a category of being that the created order had no place for. Then comes the sentence that the entire framework rests on. Speaking of the giants, the text says that because they were born from spirits above and flesh below, they will be called evil spirits upon the earth, and the earth will be their dwelling. Not the abyss, not a prison, not a sealed chamber, the earth. Their fathers, the watchers, are bound. That happens explicitly and repeatedly in the text. Azazel is chained hand and foot in a place called Dudael and covered in darkness until the day of judgment. Semjaza and his associates are bound beneath the hills for 70 generations. The text is specific about their containment. The offspring are not contained. They are released. The passage continues, describing what these spirits will do. They will afflict, oppress, destroy, attack, do battle, and work destruction on the earth. They will cause grief. They will eat nothing, but will still hunger and thirst. And they will rise up against the children of men and against the women, because they came out of them. Read that last clause again, because they came out of them. These spirits have a specific relationship to human bodies. Human flesh was half of what made them. They are not foreign to it. They are, in the most literal sense the text can manage, homesick. And then chapter 16 closes the loop with a timestamp. From the day of the slaughter and destruction and death of the giants, the spirits that went forth from their bodies will destroy without incurring judgment, and they will destroy until the day of the great consummation, without incurring judgment, until the end. That single line resolves something that reads as an inconsistency everywhere else in Scripture. Rebellious angels are described as bound, imprisoned, chained in darkness, awaiting judgment. And yet the Gospels are full of unclean spirits walking around freely in first century Galilee, entering people, speaking through them, and negotiating with Jesus. Those are not the same population. Enoch is the document that tells you why. The fathers are in custody. The children are loose, and they have no sentence, no cell, and no expiration date until the very end of the age. Before we move on to what the Gospels record, stop for a second. What you just heard about the spirits that came out of the giants is the part that changes everything. But it only makes sense when you see it written out next to the original Ge'ez text of chapter 15. The earth is their dwelling, the judgment that never arrives. It's all in the document linked below. Take 5 seconds right now, grab it, and then come back, because what comes next builds directly on it. The link is in the description. QR code is on your screen. Now watch what happens when you take that framework back to the Gospels, because the fit is exact. Matthew chapter 12, verse 43. Jesus describes an unclean spirit that has gone out of a man. And what does it do? It walks through dry places, seeking rest and finding none. Then it says, I will return to my house from which I came out, my house, not my prison, not my realm. The human body is described by the Spirit itself as its residence. In Mark chapter 5, at Gerasa, Jesus asks a name and gets an answer that is not a name at all. My name is Legion, for we are many. A plural entity occupying one body, and when they are cast out, they do not ask to be released or sent home. They beg not to be sent into the abyss, and they ask instead for permission to enter a herd of pigs, anything with a body, anything at all, rather than the state of being disembodied. That is not the behavior of a fallen angel, a being that the text says was perfectly content in heaven and had no need of flesh. That is the behavior of something that requires a body to function and cannot generate one for itself. And there is one more detail in that Gerasa account that only makes sense inside the Enochic framework. The spirits ask specifically not to be sent into the abyss. The abyss is where the fathers are. That is where the watchers were chained. The offspring are asking not to be put in their father's cell, which is precisely the distinction chapter 15 sets up. Two populations, two sentences, and one of them has not been sentenced yet, which is exactly what Enoch chapter 15 describes them as. So here is where the question reframes itself. If the entire biblical vocabulary for this final adversary describes a spirit, and if the framework of the period describes spirits that hunt for bodies because they cannot exist properly without one, then the expectation that the Antichrist is a man born somewhere with a birth certificate is looking at the wrong part of the equation entirely. The body is not the identity, the body is the vessel. And Revelation is explicit that whatever occupies it does not own the authority it wields. That authority is handed over. The Book of Enoch has a chapter about exactly this transaction, and it is the strangest chapter in the book. Chapter 69 is a roster. It names the watchers individually and lists what each one taught humanity. Gadriel is credited with leading Eve astray and with showing the sons of men the instruments of death, the shield, the breastplate, the sword. Penemu taught writing with ink and paper, and the text says this is why many have gone astray from eternity to eternity. Kasdeja taught the striking of the embryo in the womb. Every entry follows the same format, a name and a transfer of knowledge that humanity was not supposed to hold yet. Then the chapter shifts, and it introduces a figure who does not fit the pattern at all. His name is given as Kesbiel, and the text calls him the chief of the oath. The oath in question is not the oath the watchers swore on Hermon. It is something far larger. The passage describes an oath by which heaven was suspended before the world was created and forever. An oath by which the earth was founded upon the water. An oath by which the sea was given its boundary and the deep was made firm. An oath by which the sun and the moon complete their courses and do not deviate. The created order, in this text, is not held together by material forces. It is held together by a spoken oath. And that oath has a name attached to it, which the text refuses to give directly. It calls it the hidden name, and it says the name was shown to Michael and that Michael keeps it. And Kesbiel, the chief of the oath, is described as having attempted to obtain the hidden name so that he could speak it. That is the crime. Not violence, not seduction. An attempt to acquire the specific word that holds creation in position, in order to be able to use it. You do not need to speculate about what a being would do with that. The text tells you what the oath does. It keeps the sea inside its boundary, the deep firm, the sun and moon on their courses, and the heavens suspended. Anything that could speak that name could revoke those conditions. And now the throne language in Revelation reads differently. The dragon gives power and a seat and great authority, not because the recipient earned it, because there is a chain of possession here, and something at the top of it has been trying to acquire absolute authority since before the flood. There is also a reason the text keeps the name hidden rather than printing it. In the Hebrew tradition, the divine name carries operative power, not just reference. It is not a label for a being. It is the mechanism by which things were spoken into position in the first place. Enoch chapter 69 simply takes that idea to its logical end and describes creation as a standing sentence that has never stopped being spoken. Enoch, notably, ends on a throne. The section scholars call the Book of Parables, chapters 37 through 71, is built entirely around a courtroom. A figure called the Son of Man is revealed, seated on a throne of glory, and the ones brought before him are described over and over with the same phrase, the kings and the mighty, the ones who possess the earth. Chapter 46 describes them being judged for one thing specifically. They raised their hands against the Most High and they trusted in the gods they had made with their own hands. Manufactured gods, constructed objects that they placed authority into. which brings the whole thing back around to that one strange verse in Revelation 13. An image is made, it is not born, and then it is given breath, and it speaks, and it is worshipped, and it kills those who refuse. A constructed thing that receives a spirit and then holds a throne. The oldest description of that pattern is not in Revelation. It is in Enoch, written centuries earlier, and it is not framed as prophecy at all. It is framed as something that already happened once and was interrupted by water. So the obvious question is why almost no one reading a Bible in the last 16 centuries has encountered any of this. Enoch was not obscure to the first Christians. The Epistle of Jude, sitting in every New Testament printed today, quotes it directly. Jude verse 14 begins, Enoch, the seventh from Adam, prophesied about these men. What follows is a near verbatim reproduction of Enoch chapter 1, verse 9, about the Lord coming with 10,000s of his holy ones to execute judgment. A canonical book cites Enoch by name, attributes the prophecy to him personally, and treats it as authoritative. That is not a passing allusion. That is a direct citation. Tertullian, writing around the year 200 in North Africa, defended Enoch openly and argued it should be considered scripture, pointing out that Jude had already vouched for it. He also offered a theory for its rejection that is worth noting. He suggested it was set aside because it spoke too plainly about things certain readers did not want spoken plainly about. Then the direction reverses. Origen treats it cautiously and notes that the churches do not widely accept it. Augustine, in City of God, Book 15, chapter 23, addresses Enoch directly. He concedes that Enoch left writings, since Jude says so in a canonical letter. But he argues that the antiquity of the material makes it untrustworthy, and that it should be excluded from the authoritative canon. Jerome, assembling the Latin Vulgate around the year 400, lists Enoch among the Apocrypha, and the Latin Bible that would define Western Christianity for 1,000 years goes out without it. The Council of Laodicea, meeting in Asia Minor around the year 364, issues a canon restricting what may be read aloud in churches to a fixed list of approved books. Enoch is not on the list. Within a century, the book is functionally gone from the Latin and Greek world, surviving only in citation and in the accusations of people arguing against it, except in one place. The Ethiopian Orthodox Tewahedo Church never removed it. Enoch was translated into Ge'ez, the classical liturgical language of Ethiopia, probably somewhere between the 4th and 6th centuries, and it stayed in the canon there continuously. It is in the Ethiopian Bible today, not as an appendix, not as supplementary reading, as scripture. For roughly 1,200 years, the complete Book of Enoch existed on earth in exactly one language, in one country, in a church that the rest of Christendom was not corresponding with. It is worth pausing on how complete that isolation was. The Ethiopian church preserved a text in a language no European scholar read, in a country that had been cut off from the rest of Christianity by the expansion of Islam across North Africa. The book everyone in Europe was quoting secondhand, arguing about, and citing as lost was sitting intact in monastery libraries in the Ethiopian highlands the entire time, being read out loud in services. It came back almost by accident. James Bruce, a Scottish traveler searching for the source of the Nile, spent years in Ethiopia and left in 1773 carrying 3 Ge'ez manuscripts of Enoch. Europe had known the book by reputation and by quotation for over a millennium without possessing a copy. Now there were 3 sitting in Britain and France. It still took nearly 50 years for anyone to translate it. Richard Lawrence, an Oxford professor who would later become Archbishop of Cashel, published the first English translation in 1821. The reaction was not enthusiasm. The text described named angels, specific crimes, a functioning judicial process, and a category of spirit that had no place in the theology that had developed in its absence. R.H. Charles produced the translation that became standard in 1912, and that is still the version most quoted today. And then in 1947, the argument about whether any of it was authentic collapsed. The Dead Sea Scrolls surfaced at Qumran, and among the material recovered from Cave 4 were Aramaic fragments of Enoch, catalogued in the 4Q200 series. Joseph Millick, who spent decades on them, published the Aramaic Enoch fragments in 1976. They confirmed the book was being copied and read in Judea generations before the birth of Christ. They also turned up something that had not survived anywhere else. A related text scholars call the Book of Giants, in which the giants themselves are characters with names and dialogue, having dreams about the coming destruction and sending a messenger to find Enoch and ask what the dreams mean. The giants, in that text, know what is coming, and they are afraid of it. So set all of it side by side and see what you are actually holding. A text from the 2nd century before Christ describes a class of spirit created by a specific event, released by a specific catastrophe, exempt from judgment until the final day, requiring human bodies to operate, and hostile to humanity precisely because it came out of humanity. A New Testament written by people who knew that text describes unclean spirits behaving in exactly that way, calling a human body my house, and begging for any vessel rather than none. John, defining the word Antichrist for the only time in Scripture, calls it a spirit and says it was already present while he was writing. Paul says the thing is already at work and is being restrained, and that it will be revealed rather than born. And Revelation describes a throne being handed over, and an image, a made thing, receiving breath and beginning to speak. Nothing in that chain requires a man. A man appears in it only as furniture. The consistent actor across every one of those texts is a spirit that cannot manufacture a body and therefore has to be given one. What Enoch adds, and what nothing else in the surviving canon says as directly, is the motive. Chapter 69 names a being that went after the hidden name, the oath that keeps the sea in its boundary and the heavens suspended, not to destroy creation, to hold the word that governs it. That is what the throne is for. Not a country, not an army, not a term of office. A word that the sea and the heavens are currently obeying, held by something that has wanted it since before the flood and has never once been sentenced. The Ge'ez manuscripts are still in Ethiopia. The Aramaic fragments are still in Jerusalem, cataloged and photographed and available to any scholar who asks. Jude still quotes Enoch by name in every Bible printed today, in a book that was never removed, referring the reader to a source that was. The passage describing what the spirits became is chapter 15. The passage describing what one of them tried to take is chapter 69. Neither one has been edited, hidden, or lost. They have simply not been read. And the last thing chapter 16 says about the spirits that came out of the giants is that they will continue destroying without incurring judgment until the day of the great consummation. Not until they are stopped. Until the very end.